You're listening to the GC Collaborative Podcast, a resource for the worship arts team at Grace Church.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining the GC Collaborative Podcast this month. We're so excited you're with us this month. We are interviewing Chris Fetters and Rachel Caldwell from the North Overland Park campus. We're so excited for you to listen to them. Rachel has been at Grace for many years, and Chris obviously has as well, and just leading our North OP team. And so it's just awesome to talk to them, get some insight on verses and just what it's meant in their life and how that even affects worship in their lives. And so we're excited for you to hear this conversation. So join us as we talk to them. All right, everybody, welcome to the GC Collaborative Podcast. We're so excited that you're here with us today. Like I said in the intro, we're here with Chris and Rachel from the North OP campus. Chris, you are the campus pastor. Rachel, you're the worship director for the North OP campus. And we're just excited to talk to you guys. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Absolutely. Rachel's here with me, looking all spiffy. She wanted to match today.
Yeah, so you guys are matching.
I know you can't see on a podcast, but we...
So actually, I think you're matching me.
For some reason, I just want to play checkers right now, and I don't know why.
We're wearing buffalo plaid, for those of you who can't see.
Okay. That's right.
King me, Luke.
You guys,
King me.
yeah. You guys look so good. I wish I would have gotten the memo and said I just wore black.
On Wednesdays, we match.
Yeah. Well, I just generally wear black anymore now as I'm getting older. For some reason, I just look better in it, so just go that direction.
It's very slimming.
Yeah, exactly.
Very slimming, Luke.
Oh, my gosh. Anyways, as you guys know, we've been going around to the different campuses and campus pastors and worship directors and just talking about different verses and worship and how that looks just as a church and our own lives, just biblically in general, and just having a conversation about it. So, Rachel, I believe you brought some verses to kind of discuss and talk about. If you're okay with it, we'll just have you start.
All right. Yeah. So the first verse we're going to jump into is James 1, verses 2 and 3. And it says, "Consider it great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete and lacking nothing."
That's good. I think that's such a powerful verse. It's actually one of my favorites. The book of James in general is one of my favorites, but I have that memorized since I was young because I learned very early on that life does not always go like we want it to go. I grew up in the church, so going to summer camps, and you'd have what you call that camp high, and that's fun to worship, so to speak, in those environments when everyone else is singing the same songs and they don't have their phones, but we really didn't have cell phones back in the, shows my age,
You had the car phone. You had to go to the car.
Yes. And I didn't have a car then. So
You just didn't have phone.
you could text, but it's like 50 cents a text. So, so why would you...
you had to really be in love to text somebody.
Yes, you did. Yes. And my dad would have
Dreaded
said...
the day the phone bill came for your dad?
Yeah. I'd be like, "Hey, Dad, I'm in love with her." He's like, "Well, no, I don't love her."
Yeah,
so
still got to go mow some lawns to make up for this.
Yes. But it's easy to worship when you have everyone around you worshiping. But as you grow, you realize that life is hard. Life is difficult. You have great moments. You have hard moments. You have victory and you have suffering. And so as I got a little older, I realized that James was such a powerful book. And when it says, "Consider it pure joy," that's a hard thing when things are difficult. And so I just want to ask, what that looks like, or what, just thinking about that. I've known both of you a long time. And to be vulnerable here, I've seen a lot of amazing moments in both your lives, and I've seen a lot of difficult moments. And so I'm just wondering, what that might look like for you guys. And then I'll share mine, but maybe what was a hard moment that and why you decided to worship.
Hold on. This is my podcast. I'm the one interviewing.
Sorry. Role reversal.
You're on this podcast, young man. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, sir. Whatever you say, sir. But I was saying, I genuinely want to know because
absolutely.
I think it'd be fun for all of us to share. But I was just processing, in those very hard moments, what did that look like for you? Why did this verse come to your heart, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, like people always think about worship. Like when you picture people with their hands in the air with a smile on their face. You know, like the moments of the high energy songs where you're there and you're like David dancing and jumping and dancing in the Bible. You think about that, but there's also like the parts where like the sweet times in worship that God also sees, where you're worshiping out of a sacrificial place and you're worshiping from sorrow and trials and that moment where you're deciding to lean in, press in, and choose to turn those moments of sorrow and suffering into joy and thanksgiving. And it's such an act of sacrifice because you have to choose to do that, because you could run from it and you could like run through it, but instead sitting in it to say, God, I'm going to choose to worship you, even though this makes no sense, even though I don't want to right now. Like just being able to admit sometimes, like, God, today I'm mad and I'm going to worship through it. That is such a sacrifice that God loves and he sees. And it's so powerful for you to sit there to say, like, I'm still going to be here and show up in this moment, and being able to do that, like, through the sorrow and like turn your sorrow into thanksgiving is just it's a hard thing to do.
That's good. I think for me, if I think about it, consider it pure joy, the translation I had memorized, when you encounter various trials. So often people equate joy with happiness, and that's not the same thing. And so like for different moments in my life, whether like I'll take a happy moment and then a hard moment, all within 8 hours. So a happy moment, my wife and I got married in August 2006. August 11, 2006. Great moment of worship and celebration and anticipation. And 8 hours later, my grandfather dies. So you have two moments, one that's awesome, one that's hard, very difficult. Or I think about the birth of our kids. We had our first two kids. That's a celebration of life. And then our third pregnancy, when Lindsay got pregnant, we celebrate and tell people, and then a little time goes by, and then there's a miscarriage. That's a hard moment. So what is joy in that, and what brings me to worship? And I think that joy, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter various trials. How do you have joy when you're in the valley of suck? And so for me, it's like acknowledging, one, that God is on his throne. I mean, worship, the purpose of worship is to give God his breath back. I mean, he gave me life. So to glorify him, to honor him, to put him on the throne of my life, to acknowledge him, to say, you're more important than anything else, that I trust you in the good times and the hard times. So when I began to really understand that joy is not happiness, but joy really is resting in the confidence of who God is, his power, his sovereignty, his love, his sacrifice, the gospel, Jesus giving his life to us so we can live, like that's where real joy. And, the idea of living life with eternity in perspective. So knowing that this life that we're living now is just temporary, but worshiping God is eternal. And so understanding that joy doesn't come from a feeling, but from who God is and what he has done. And so that allowed me in the hardest of times and the best of times, when I worship him with this joy in the midst of the most desperate longing of times, it's like aligning my heart with him in worship brings this supernatural joy that only the Spirit can bring.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I just think it's interesting because, I think no matter who you are, hard things happen. So it doesn't matter if you're billionaire, millionaire, regular person, like, greatest family in the world, whatever.
Are you the billionaire or millionaire? That's what I want to know.
Neither.
Okay. Keep writing songs, Luke. You'll get there.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Spotify. No, but it's just crazy because everybody goes through hard times, right? And so I think sometimes it's just even coming to that fact that as humans we struggle, like that's just part of it. But so then what separates Christians and people who don't believe in Jesus? And I think to me it is that it's the realization that there's a God who loves you, that no matter what happens, there can be good that come from it. The beauty from ashes idea or truth and concept. there has to be ashes to have beauty. You know what I mean? That verse doesn't come true. It's not beauty from good things. There's just literally ashes. And so I think if we take that very specifically, there has to be ashes to bring beauty from. And so I think things like that. I think I always think about the cross and how there was a resurrection afterwards. I always look at like Jesus, it talks about how he had joy or was like content in going to the cross. And in my personal mind, I believe he knew he was going to be resurrected, so he knew there was going to be a resurrection. So then going to the cross was hard, and it was obviously horrible, but he knew there was a greater purpose coming from it.
Sunday was coming.
Yeah, and so I think even as Christians, at least for me, that's what's got me through some really horrible times, is realizing, okay, there is going to be a resurrection, for lack of better, well, that's actually probably the best word, in this situation of some sort. It might not look like I want it to, it might not be, but it's the valley of suck is not the end, right?
There's another side.
Yeah, and just trusting the Lord in that, because then what comes into is timing, and you're like, okay, that can happen today, that can happen today.
3 months later.
Well, and I would even say, think about the early apostles. Most of them, their resurrection power wasn't in this life. There's people who are dying right now that might listen to this, that they might die tomorrow of some sickness, incurable disease. Well, they're going to face resurrection. They're going to experience new life if they're giving their life to Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? And so I do think of this also, it's hard. Sometimes make a point here. Sometimes it's easier to worship the Lord when things are going well. Sometimes it's even easier to worship the Lord when things are really hard because you're crying out for something. But what about kind of the unknown moments of life? And so I think about David, right, who's one of the greatest worshipers and warriors we've ever seen. We see Psalms are full of his writing and worship in good and bad times. But I always remember, consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials. It's testing of your faith produces endurance. Endurance must do its complete work so you can become mature and complete, lacking nothing. Well, one story when David is about to face Goliath. Think about this for a moment. And Saul's like, you're a young boy. You can't face this unknown giant, this guy that's intimidating. You're going to last a second out there. He's probably just talking down to him, being sarcastic or being fearful or doubtful that there's no way that you can overcome this giant. And what David says is that, I don't want to misquote it, but in a sense he says, you deliver me from both the hand of a bear and the mouth of a lion, and because of that I will trust in the Lord my God. And so in the face of the unknown, what David does, he says, I can worship, I can be confident, I can be obedient because God is faithful and he keeps his promises. I've seen him do it before and he'll do it again. So when it comes to worship in that valley of suck and the hard times, to be joyful is to look at our life and see how God has been faithful up to this point.
Yeah.
And when we do that, you can't help but raise your hands in worship. You can't help but get on your knees and be thankful because if nothing else, I've received salvation. And so how can I worship and joy in the valley? Is seeing God's faithfulness and see him coming through over and over and over again. And that's what our Bible's full of. And that's what I see in my life. Not always how I wanted it, but you cannot dismiss how God's hand is on every part of our lives.
Yeah.
So speaking of Psalms, I'm going to share.
Yeah, there's another one that we had talked about. It was Psalm 31, verse 7 and 8. It says, I will rejoice and be glad in your faithful love because you've seen my affliction. You know the troubles of my soul, and you have not handed me over to the enemy, and you've set my feet in a spacious place. And I feel like that goes along with what you were saying, especially with the part that says you have not handed me over to the enemy. Like when I'm reading this verse, and this verse is coming a time in my life where, I'm sitting in the unknowns too, and sitting there to say, I know you haven't handed me over to the enemy because I have seen you work in the past. And so I'm going to choose to rejoice and be glad and choose thanksgiving to say, God, you saved me from this and you're going to save me from this again. I don't necessarily know how it's going to turn out. And I don't really see what you're going to do, but I'm going to trust that you're working in this. And, you know, like I thought through that verse, it says, you've set my feet in a spacious place. And for me, that meant like freedom and space where his very presence is in the air around you and you're sitting there and he's there with you in those moments of unknown. You're not waiting by yourself. You're not, you know, left to figure it out on your own. It's honestly that place where you can sit back and say, God, I don't have to know what you're going to do here. Thank goodness it's not on my shoulders to figure out. I'm one where I like to problem solve and I like to...
Oh, never,
like,
Rachel.
When I like to work.
When Rachel comes to the problem, she's already thought 25 steps ahead.
Yes,
If
yes.
this, and then I can do this, and this. I'm like, wait, Rachel. Let's just
Worst
take a
case
breath.
scenario.
Let's. Okay, the world has not ended.
You
The
have both
zombies are not
supervised
all
me.
here.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just a mother for you.
But you
Just
know
being a
what?
mother.
Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But God knows that about me and he knows. And what he's been teaching me lately is to say, before you come up with those plans, because you planned me right out of it, before you come up with them, acknowledge where you are. And there's power in that of you saying, God, this sucks. Or, God, I am so sad. I'm so, like, I don't understand what's happening right now. I can't see you in this. But before I try to figure out a way to do whatever I want to do, whether it's get out of it or find you in it, I'm just going to say, can you show me what you're doing? And turn that into like think about the song Waymaker. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Like the power of saying, I know you're going to do something here. I can't physically see it with my eyes, but I'm going to trust that you're going to do it. And being able, there's so many songs that are out there that you can sing in those moments back to God to say, like, as like a, you know, like meditation act of you sitting down and saying, I'm going to do this so I don't sit here and try to plan my way 1 through 12 out of this. You know, I'm going to let you do that work and show me.
Yeah, but I think there's power in the honesty of that too. I was talking
absolutely.
to somebody on Sunday about it. It's like, I think so many times, at least in my life, it's like I try to have the faith and I want to have the faith, and then I'll like go and be like, oh no, I have faith that God's going to do this or that. And then it's that breaking moment where it's just like, God, I don't have the faith.
Absolutely.
And there was a time in my life where I remember I got home and just life was not great, and to say the least. And I just was trying to have all the faith and all the belief that, you know, God was moving and doing stuff, and got home and I just remember like just yelling and crying, you know, and got so tired that I literally was just on the ground, like exhausted, because I was just so many emotions. And I honestly thought God was just like a lightning bolt was like because of the things I said. But it was like, well, yeah. And I'll never forget it. It was like this, you know, this voice or this knowing of this. And I was like, I couldn't even move. And I just felt like this voice was just like, okay. Like I knew that was in you, but it had to come out in order for me to like move and give you the faith. And I think for a lot of people, it's like I'll talk to people going through hard times. It's like, oh, I've had faith and God's doing nothing, and I've had this faith, and the faith is all about them, which is understandable. We're human. But I do think it's that turning point of us realizing that we don't have enough faith in and of ourselves, and that God gives us that faith, I think. And, you know, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I was at coffee with somebody just this morning having this exact conversation of saying like, hey, have you been spending time with God today? And they looked me dead in the eyes and said, honestly, no. I said, okay, great. Like, thank you for being honest about it. And I said, is there something like in the way of that? And they said, yeah, like I'm mad. Like I'm upset that this is what's happening right now. I said, okay, well, have you talked to him? Have you sat down and gotten that out of the way?
Yeah.
Or are you just sitting in it? And they said, no, I'm just sitting in it. So I want to challenge you then to take that to the feet of Jesus and give it to him and say, God, I don't understand why. And I've had to do that, like just even recently in my own life, to say, okay, God, I've prayed. And yet, here we are.
Yeah.
So what now?
Yeah. But then I think the cool thing about that is that then because I think sometimes, sorry, I always say this. I was just talking to somebody about this.
Right. We just said that 3 different times.
Right. But sometimes I think we think if we read the books and we read the Bible, like we don't have to go through those things, or we'll know, like if we read a book about life and how to live it in a Christian way. Like, we'll skip some of the hard things. Like, I'll stay away from that. Which I do think there's knowledge and wisdom. I love reading books. So I'm not saying that. But I do think
read your books, kids.
We have to remember that there is the reason you can trust, it's like any other relationship. So I think of it like any other relationship you have. I don't trust people the moment I meet them, right? I might be friends with them, but I wouldn't trust them with big things. And I think it's the same thing with God, is you have those, and that's going back to the David, where he talks about, like, I've seen your faithfulness in these things when I was probably scared, didn't know what I was doing, thought I was going to die, and you came through. Yeah. And so because of that, now there's another situation, which I don't know if it took more or less faith. Bear and lion are pretty scary. So depending on how big they were. But it's like, I have this, like any relationship. I've seen your faithfulness in this, thus I can trust you now with this.
I have these moments to fall back on. Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes I think as Christians, I don't know, once again, it might change my view in 5 years, 5 minutes. I think as Christians, sometimes we think, if I just, how do I want to say this? I think it just takes rapport with God to have that trust and walk through those things. And that's not just I've read this verse, thus I will have this faith, which it helps. I'm not saying it
has absorbed in me. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's a level of experience that has to happen, I think, with anything where it's like, I know for me, because of the trials I've gone through and the things I've seen that looked very hopeless, then to see what God did, it's like, I now have, not to say I won't lack faith later sometime maybe, but I've seen him move in these ways, thus,
because those moments, like, if you have allowed them to, for me, when I look back, the purest form of connection that I've had with God has actually come in those really hard times, and the times where I've had to sit there and be like, God, I can't even breathe for this moment. Can you breathe for me right now? And he's just like, never thought you'd ask.
Yeah, right.
I think we're talking about worshiping in those hard moments.
Yeah.
Having joy in the midst of suffering. I think it's important to have the accurate theology of suffering. Like, what is the purpose of suffering? I mean, if you think about it for a moment, Jesus, the purpose of his suffering was to make us whole and to make us new, take all of our sin and shame on the cross. And on the third day, he conquered that sin and conquered that death and was made new. There's a purpose to his suffering. And what is the theology of suffering? It's for us to become more like him. There's purpose in our suffering. I think, for example, if everything was easy, I'm going to think of suffering moments, whether it was when one of my close relatives overdosed, or another one committed suicide, or another one experienced a severe jail time. I mean, that's just in close family members right there. Or the suffering of, even in ministry, like you lead in a church and people come into and as a pastor, this is my place of worship, of work, of community, of purpose, of life, and of joy. And there's people that come in and I don't think they mean to do it, and then they leave, and then it's like, wait, am I just supposed to turn off the switch of these relationships? Just like friendship suffering and longing for this. And so you think about like all these difficult things. Well, I do think of me coaching football. So I coach my son's football team, one of the coaches. If every practice was easy, if we didn't run him hard, if we didn't let him practice tackling the right technique, if it was all just, hey, we're so glad that you're here, let's just all make this very lighthearted, let's not work at all, they would not be prepared for battle. They would not be prepared for what's ahead. So I think it's important to understand that what God is doing in our suffering, it's making us more like him. It's making us more sanctified, which means to become more like him. And we're creating his image. And so he does it out of love. I push our players hard on that football field because I love them and I want them to be ready and I know what they can do and to maximize what they've been given. I feel like God is the same with us. Like we experience his suffering and he's working in it. And he cares. It says, I will be glad and the psalmist said in verse 7, says, I'll be glad and rejoice in your unfailing love. Why can we rejoice? Because he loves us at all times. His love is unfailing no matter what we've said, no matter what we've done, no matter who we've offended, no matter what mistakes we've made. He is unfailing. He loves us no matter what. Because for you have seen my troubles. And this makes us confront in verse 7 here. Do we really believe that God cares about us? Mm-hmm. Like if we're going to get through suffering, if we're going to have this heart that runs after him and have joy in worship when our spouse dies, or when our kids are sick, or when we experience loss in relationship or a marriage ends, whatever it may be, do we believe that God sees us? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't, you're going to have trouble. You're not going to be able to have joy in the midst of suffering. Mm-hmm. You're not really going to be able to worship if you get down there. We can get mad at God, and he can take our anger for what it's worth. And we're going to have moments where we don't believe that. But at the core of it, we see a God, a creator, that at every page of the Bible, it is so evident he knows his people, he knows their troubles, he knows their insecurities, he knows their hurts, their hang-ups, their habits. He knows everything about them, and he cares enough about them to shape them, to mold them into someone who is ready for battle. And I think that it's important to understand, not only can we worship him because his love is unfailing, but he sees us.
Yeah.
He sees you in every moment. And so I think, though, a lot of people don't really believe that God sees them.
Yeah.
That he cares about the most intricate part of their soul. And he does. And if we really can get there, man, what a worshipful, joyful place to be.
What do you think on the flip side of that? Because I feel like I run into this a lot on the flip side of, because I 100% agree. But do you think there's a level of like, sorry, once again, this is just me thinking. There's a level of, because I find that people, when they go through hard stuff, sometimes are like, well, I thought God loved me. I thought he did care about me. Obviously, he doesn't, because this is happening. And so I think there's that side of it. But then I wonder if there's the other side, too.
If that's the case, I'd ask, what is their theology of suffering?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not fun. That's not sexy to talk about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's not prosperity filled. I mean, it is like truly like the disciples like, I gave my life. Like, I follow you. Your kingdom is here. And I just got crucified upside down.
Yeah.
But I think honestly something that we're not, maybe this is me, but we're not good at is acknowledging that we are suffering. Like people just saying, oh, well, just, like there's another side coming. Like, no, like somebody's sitting down with you to say, yeah, this sucks. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry. Like looking at people's eyes and saying like, I see you in this, that God sees you in this. He like sit down and ask him to say, God, what are you doing? And turn your questions, because there's so many questions that come up in those moments. I mean, I faced them myself of saying like, oh, okay, so I prayed against this specifically and it happened. So so are you like, were you just like on a phone call with somebody else at the moment? Or like, did I not say it in the right language? Do I need to say it in a different language?
Yeah.
What is that? And
all
God's
real
saying,
thoughts.
all real thoughts, like acknowledging that, saying, it is okay to have those. Like everyone has them and God knows them, whether or not you voice them out loud, but allowing someone to sit in that with you and then to say, okay, so God, can you show me what you're doing? And then honestly look for it and allow him to do that. I think that's something for me when I walk through that, to say, what is happening right now? What are you doing? Yeah. And then like sitting and waiting and allowing him to show me what he's doing, and looking for the beauty and the joy in the valley of suck, as you say, and sitting in it for a second. I'm not saying to sit in it for forever, because that's not healthy, but to sit in it, bring people in it with you that can even see the things that you can't, if it's that hard.
But I'd argue, though, if you're dealing with it correctly, well, as correctly as you can, I don't think there's like a
right.
A plus B equals C. But I think you get to a level where you're tired of, like, I think if you're dealing with it and it's fleshing itself out, there will be a day where you're like, okay, it's time to move on. I think when you don't move on sometimes, it's because you don't actually deal with it. You know, you might complain about it or whatever, but you don't actually process it. So I think for people who sit in that like fear, because I know people who are like, I don't want to be stuck in it, and it's like, well, you're not gonna be stuck in it if you're processing it.
Yeah, there's extreme, right? Just people who just lament and they just live in that state of like just I'm done and give up.
Yeah.
But then there's the blind emotional health.
I don't feel anything.
God is good all the time.
Yeah.
God is good all the time.
That's not. Yeah. How are you doing? Oh, God is good.
Yeah. So
yeah, He is, but I don't feel very good right now.
Yeah.
It's like
But it's also I think it's the messiness of life too, right? It's like I think as Americans we love efficiency. So even with our emotions, I'll speak for myself. I'm this way where it's like, okay, I'll deal with pain, but let's make it efficient. Like as long as I
we got 5 minutes for pain, and then we're moving on.
I got this much time, and then I got to move on. And so
and that's the endurance thing of sitting there saying, okay, God, so is the pain going to end like now, right? Like it's going to end now, and God's saying, well, the pain changes. When you go through a trial, there's another day where guess what? Another trial pops up, and you're like, okay, this again? And God's like, well, this is another endurance thing where you can look to me and you can say, do you trust me? Like, do you believe that I'm working in this? And will you lean in and try to figure out like how to worship me through this?
I would say, as I think about it, to your point, both your points really, but the idea of when you're dealing with it and how you work through something. When I think about relationship, like with my spouse, Lindsay, whom I love with my whole heart. But if we never talked about the most important things or we're intentional, it seems easier just to move on, not to be real with your emotions, just to kind of put a Band-Aid on that and not really deal with the fears, the insecurities, the fences. And so I think when our marriage is healthy, it's just when we're having intentional conversations, we're sitting in the hard stuff, we're working through it, but are encouraging and praying for each other through it. Same with God. If you're struggling in your relationship with the Lord, like you're not going. So 2 ways. One, if Lindsay and I just ignored him and said, "Oh, it's unforgivable. I'm mad at her," we're going to end a divorce. Or the other is going to probably end in divorce or this false sense of relationship because we're just everything's okay. Just tie a bow on it and move past. Let's not intentionally deal with this. The same.
You're going to be running into the rugs that you were sweeping things under.
Yes, exactly. You go, this is going to hit you hard. You're going to fall on your face.
There are going to be mountain ranges at some point.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to get over it.
Yeah.
Relationship with God is why He is all loving, all knowing. He's unfailing, all powerful. I do think it's important in the hard moments just to be intentional with God.
Absolutely.
Write out your prayers to Him. Tell Him you're mad at Him.
Absolutely.
Tell Him you need hope and you need help. Trust Him in that. Be vulnerable with Him and then go to His Word and look at His promises in those tough times. And I think if we do that, you'll get this overwhelming sense of joy because His Word does not return void. It has a way of filling us up. It has a way of convicting us, for giving us strength and purpose because God's Word comes alive.
Absolutely.
So I would say the beautiful thing about these verses, if you're out there and you're listening to this podcast, like write just these verses down. If you're through a valley right now, just pray it over and be intentional and say, God, I want to consider it joy. I don't now. I consider it pure joy. When I encounter trials, for I know the testing of my faith produces endurance. God, I don't want to be an endurance athlete right now, but you want to make me full and complete. You don't want me lacking anything. Just to be honest with Him. And when we just pray His Word, when we write His Word, when we meditate on His Word, when we memorize His Word, this isn't a platitude. This is not like I believe this wholeheartedly.
Oh, absolutely.
Like this is where strength comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's something you've never done before, I mean, honestly, even just 2 weeks ago, I was facing something and I was like, I don't even know. Like, I don't see you in this. And I felt called to go to the Word. And so I even went to Google, and I typed in verses
Sometimes the Google helps.
Absolutely. And then God brought me this Psalms. And as I was reading it, I just cried because I was like, you're here. Like, you see me. You're in it.
Oh, yeah.
Amen.
Well, I think you have to read the Bible because I think just even like if people are like, oh, it's, being told in spiritual, like, oh, you're making it too hard or legalistic. To me, if we believe it's the absolute truth, then, renewing your mind, right, daily. And so, because as a human, you do, at least for me, I go to those negative things quickly where it's like
easier.
worst outcome, this is, whatever it might be. And so it is renewing your mind with what is actually reality. And so if we believe God is absolute reality, then the way he sees things is absolute reality. So that's the way I want to see it, right? Yeah. And so I think in trials, especially to everybody's point of, there is a purpose, there is a reason for it. And I think that's been some of the most powerful times for me too, is God, just show me. Like, I am not seeing it. And I think it was one of the verses we looked at, but it's like, ask him for wisdom and he'll give it to you.
Well,
James,
goes on, moves on chapter, verses 5 and 6.
And I think
lacks wisdom, ask for it.
And that's what he does, though.
Absolutely.
At least for me, like in those times when I'm like, I don't see any reason for hope or joy or anything good coming from this situation, and then he begins to show you that, and in only ways he can. And it might not be, oh, this is going to happen the way you want it to, but hey, here's something to have joy in today. And I think that's one of the most beautiful, like crazy things about God that I've
So can I ask a question? I don't want to be role reversal. I'm not taking over your job, Luke. I don't want
totally
your job.
Joking.
Okay?
I was just messing with you.
Wow.
So,
do I need to mediate?
Well, for those listeners,
there's too many years to mediate.
Yes.
Can I go home?
We're going on year 14 almost, Luke.
That's right.
So 13 and a half years.
Yeah,
so
pretty crazy.
Yeah, you want to do relationship counseling with Luke and I?
Yeah,
right now?
you don't want that in your life.
I don't think no.
Yeah.
I haven't had enough coffee for
But
that.
I think I'm just going to ask for a moment. And this is really I'm going to ask y'all to be vulnerable for a moment. Okay? So that's not fun.
But I think,
you can cut this out. That's fine. But I don't think people want to hear, like, just our thoughts. I think I'll just say this. I know you guys really well, and I know it's been fun to see the Lord work. I'm not asking for details of vulnerable moments. What I'm asking is, what would you say to the person that is sitting in the place of hopelessness that maybe you once felt, in a defining moment in your walk, where you just said, God, I surrender to you and I have joy in you no matter what? I would just, if you're willing to share that, I just think it'd be cool, because I know for me, if I think about one of the hardest moments in my life, I just started getting the book of Psalms out because I didn't feel like I wanted to worship.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I had strength. And I read Psalms every day, as many verses as I could. And I just kept reading it. And ultimately, where I had to come to is, regardless of the outcome, I know he loves me and that he's going to strengthen me and that he is worthy. And so for me, it was this moment of like surrender. Like, I like to control. Those who know me, I can be a controlling person. Yeah, good. No, I don't need any help from you two. Okay, just keep your mouth shut. I like it my way. I do. I'm a self... I don't know. I admit.
Comment?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. You just commented by saying.
But aren't most people like that?
Yeah,
I mean, let's
touche. Just different. It's exposed differently.
Yeah, exactly.
But really, coming to the place of complete surrender.
Yeah.
That was a defining moment. It's spiritual, but it's true. It's like, I cannot control this. So I'm just interested for you guys. Like, what was a defining moment? If you think of the most horrific thing that has happened to you, and you had all that angst and insecurity and anger and sorrow and loss, like, what was the defining moment that you were able to have joy and worship him in that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first and just say, when I was walking through those first like a few days after divorce, trying to figure out like, I don't even know like what is up and down right now, I remember thinking like, I do not have the capacity to face any single one emotion today, God, but yet I've got all of them somehow, and just felt God say like, okay, like just sit with me for a minute, and just pick one. And I was like, okay, cool. And then every day I'd wake up after that, and there would be like one emotion, not saying like I didn't feel it after that day, but I said, God, I want you to bring me songs today. My mentor at the time called them songs in the night, but songs today that help me face this one thing, because I don't even have the energy to read the word yet, because I was just so exhausted and so tired and so like unhealthy spiritually, in a place where I just didn't even know who I was anymore and who God was and what he could do. And he brought me songs, like that still to this day I sing them, and I can think about the emotion I was working through and God being there with me in that moment. And then ultimately that ended up making me want to go and say, what was that song written about? And that took me to the Word to say, like, okay, the people who were writing the song, they were going through something too, and this touched my heart. And I went in, and I went up, and they have amazing resources that say like what the song's story is behind it, the verse it comes from. And then I started like diving into Psalms and James and all of these like incredible verses that showed me that people in the Bible have gone through that too, to say, God, like, I don't understand. I don't see this. How is this where I'm at? But yet you're here with me. And for him, like, I felt his presence with me every day in that simple way to say, I'm going to choose to say that I'm going to trust you to bring songs that will help me walk through what I'm walking through. And he did. And I have a playlist still to this day that I go back, and it's hard for me to listen to because the emotions are so raw and real, but I remember them, and I remember his presence in that. And I've been able to give that to other people to walk through, to say, hey, here is a playlist for when you're ready to face this emotion, like this emotion and this emotion, but to really know that God's in that, like, was huge for me.
What's the name of the playlist?
It's hidden, so I only share it with those.
What's the name of it?
Who are ready.
That's what I want to know. What's the name of the playlist?
I think it's something about battling something. I don't remember. I may have changed it later because I was like, well, that's an angsty name. We're going to change that.
See, I'm too emo. I'd be like, songs to cry to.
I think it's called The Feels. No.
Songs to have emotions to.
Yeah.
Oh, man. No,
God knows Luke has a few of them.
Hey.
Yeah. Safe place, right?
He doesn't need you defending him.
No, I think I've shared this story on this podcast before, but as Chris knows, I was a very emotional human being. Probably still am.
You just commented on that.
Yeah. Where like everything affected my emotions. And so I remember probably around the time of the crying and being exhausted on the ground, there was another night where same thing, just felt so many emotions and things that I was like, I can't deal with this. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle it. And I just remember God just telling me, I want you to just put on like a fun worship song and just like dance. And so I closed all the blinds.
Did the dead wallaby come out?
It probably did. The dead wallaby is famous.
Yes. My kids know it.
As well they should. Yeah. Everybody should. But I just remember...
We should put it on TikTok.
Because I remember thinking... like, when this situation's over, I'll have joy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's to what you're talking about. And I felt like God was like, no, you can have joy today. And I'd never... experience that. Like, everything situationally always affected me, just because, as artists, we feel things very deeply, right? And so it just always affected me very deeply, and because I let it. And so I remembered him saying, like, you can have joy today, and I want you to just like put on a song and just dance. And it was like at the worst of the worst, and I just remember doing that. And from then on, nothing changed situationally. I still had days where it was tough and hard, but there was this sense of like, okay, I can choose to have joy.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes where we can forget is like, we don't have to let situations affect us. We don't have to, they will. And I'm not saying like be a robot and feel nothing, but to realize like you can feel those things, but they don't have to dictate. You can still have joy, and you can still process hard things and be in hard things. And I think, but the cool thing is, to bring it all back to worship even, is I think when you realize those things, like, God comes alive. And so many times I think our worship suffers because we feel like we can't go through those things, or we have to act a certain way, or we can't yell and just be frustrated. And I think that's the thing I've realized through really tough trials and situations, is God is a very real God who is God of a really very real people. And I think he realizes that more than we do. And the times I've let him into those moments where it's just, I'm not proud of, or I'm not happy about, or any of those things, it's that's when even my worship completely changes, because I realize he's very real, and he's bigger than my happy feelings and my, good feelings, if you will. But he's God of all of them. And like and he loves me in all of them. And it's like, I think we can say those things, but once again, until we experience them with him, that's when he shows himself. It's like a marriage. Like when your spouse or even as a kid, if your parent sees you at your worst and you still realize that they're there for you and care about you, that's a total different thing than if you feel like you have to keep impressing them or keep them around in some way. And I think it's the same thing with God. But so many people, I think, live with God in a way of, I've got to keep kind of impressing him to keep him around, where it's like when you get past that, then it's like, worship lights on fire. Give me all. This is that's what happens when you interview me. I just get going. No,
when he interviews you.
Just kidding.
The last thing that I have, what I would just say for me is if you're struggling right now in any way, there is power in worship in the Word, in song, and then in community. And I'll just say both of you are so freakishly talented. You're very gifted, but more important than all that is you're good friends. And I would tell you that if you're out there and you feel alone, there's something so beautiful about like biblical loving in the midst of community. And I just want to tell you guys, in the midst of hard moments in my life, thank you for being people that accept me, that love me, that show me Jesus in those moments. And it also makes it easier for what it is, to worship when you have people like you in my life. So thank you. I love you guys, both of you.
Oh.
Yeah. And I would say definitely community, honestly. That's the one thing I always encourage people to, if hard times, is be around people that will love you and encourage you, because your mind will get the best of you.
Yeah, don't face it in isolation. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's a really good point of just, once again, it's just reality. It's, I will say from experience, the people that I know that go through things who don't have community, just matter of factly, they struggle a lot more.
Absolutely.
Because they don't have people.
Yeah, you don't have somebody calling you out on the thoughts that are not.
God. Well, and just lifting you up and being. And I know, me and Chris have been through a lot in life, and I honestly, I don't mean to get on another tangent, but I tell people all the time, I don't understand how people make it through life without friends who can like speak to them, because I know in my life I've had so many situations that if I didn't have somebody, and it wasn't like sin or anything, it was just, how good I was, what my self-worth was, like those kinds of things. And if I didn't have friends speaking life into me and telling me the reality, it's like I would have just spun in circles for years.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
All of us.
And so I think that's another great point of just in general, it's just community and suffering.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's messy, but it's good.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
And you also have a lot of I can think of a few situations with us that I think of to this day that make me laugh.
Oh yes, that's the best thing about
some of the hardest moments in life and the things.
So then we can make fun of each other. You got to have laugh a little bit.
Oh my gosh!
You got to laugh.
If you
a
don't
little
laugh,
bit.
you cry sometimes. That's for sure. So laugh and worship as well.
Yeah. So how should we make fun of Rachel right now?
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh! But no, it's kind of cool because I think it's cool how these podcasts always come along, and even just sitting here, and I know we talked right before we got here about like what verses and stuff, but I think it is crazy because three of us have been through a lot together in life, and good moments and hard moments, and so it's kind of cool that we all three got to have this conversation.
We're still here. We're still here. We're still alive.
Hanging on.
Yeah.
Sometimes by thread.
Oh my gosh. But
maybe
anyways,
this time next year we'll still be here. We'll see.
Yeah. In all seriousness, thank you guys so much for being here and talking with us. It was awesome. And thank you, listeners, for listening. Hopefully, as always, you get something and God uses it in some way, shape, or form. But we will come back next time with Brian Gann and Kurt White are on the docket next time from the Olathe campus. So we're excited about that. So thank you guys for joining us.
See you.
Thanks again, Chris and Rachel, for joining us on the podcast. That was just awesome. It's always awesome to hear people's stories, how that just interacts with Scripture and what God has done. And hopefully it encourages you. We always just believe that testimony and just hearing what God's done and using Scripture and hearing Scripture hopefully encourages and brings us all more faith and hope and encourages us in our walk with God. So we hope that happened with you. Thanks for joining us this month. We always just really appreciate it. And hopefully it encourages you as artists and worship leaders and worshipers in the church, and shows you just different aspects of God that maybe we haven't thought of before, or maybe we're in a moment where we needed to hear that. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And as always, if you are on the worship team at Grace, we ask so kindly that you would either accept or decline your Planning Center invites, because that just helps us an amazing amount. And it also helps not calling or texting people last minute to fill in on positions because somebody couldn't do it, even though that happens sometimes, because life happens sometimes. As we talked about, life happens sometimes, and so that does. But if we can, try to avoid those last minute phone calls. So thank you all so much. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the GC Collaborative Podcast. If you have any questions or would like more information, check us out at visitgracechurch.com.